Hello, everyone, and welcome back to a brand spanking new episode of the StudioMEcast. Today, I have a very special guest, Brittany Graham. Brittany Graham is a wardrobe designer. Let's just jump into it. So, Brittany, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Absolutely. I'm really glad we could do this. And we haven't had a wardrobe person on the podcast before. And actually, my first kind of professional internship situation, I was actually a wardrobe assistant.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was for a series of little projects with a company called Vinegar Hill. Very, very excellent production company. Those people are amazing. And it was a fun project to be on because the wardrobe was like it was a bunch of little shorts. One of them was like some military stuff. Another one was like other historical things. Like it was fun to be in the wardrobe for it. But my experience from that was, as I'm driving home with the person who was head of wardrobe for that, I'm a budding director, and I said, "What advice do you have for a director as someone who's in wardrobe?" And they said, be kind to your vanities and your actors will look amazing. Mm-hmm. And I've always, verbatim, that's what they said. And so I've always been tried to take extra care, or, at least, I don't know about extra compared to anybody else, but, it's like pay attention to the wardrobe and makeup people, because what they do really, really, really comes across. So yeah, that's where I come from with this, but why don't you just, I don't want to spend the entire time talking about your backstory, I guess, but because I want to get into like where you are now and more recently and stuff, but how did you get started in this part of film production?
How did I get started? That's a great question. It's, a lot of times I think the answer to how did you get into costumes is I fell into it a lot. There are some people who are like, I've always wanted to be a costume designer ever since I was little, but most of the people I know are like, yeah, looking back, I've always been designing costumes. I've always thought of people in how they clothe themselves and how they present themselves to the world, and I've always, made clothes for my stuffed animals and things like that, but it's most of us kind of fell into it either in college or in work, and that's exactly how it happened with me. I was a theater major in my undergrad and just kind of kept being made into the costume designer and the working in the shop. And when I started working, I worked for 7 years after I graduated undergrad and before I went to grad school, and then again, I kind of fell into film. It's just, the people that the people that you meet, people are always kind of asking around, oh yeah, can you do this? Are you available? Blah, blah, blah. And the more often you say yes, the more work you get. So,
You fell into it with theater or film. Were there other roles that you filled before doing wardrobe? Like, did that come about as a result later, like after writing or acting or anything? Or did it really start with that?
I was an actor, so I think a lot of my process is very character driven. So, because that's what my original training was in character work. So I started as an actor. I was an actor professionally for about a year. It was in the middle of the recession in 2008, and I got to a place where I felt like I needed to choose, and I chose costumes.
Awesome. So yeah, it's really interesting to hear how people find themselves or pursue these different roles, because at the end of a movie there's a really long credit list, and I think a lot of people when they're younger think about being an actor, and a lot continue on with that, of course, but there's a lot of roles that a lot of people don't always immediately think about filling, which end up being like their passion. And I think in another life, would want to be in like the armor, like wardrobe fabrication side of things, just because I've like, Lord of the Rings just made me go, oh, armor and chainmail and leather working and all that is the coolest thing. I've done a little bit of that. But it's really cool to hear how, like, it just, how you get into that there. Now, you do a couple of things with this where you will do the fabrication yourself, and you'll also kind of be scrounging, I guess, around for other parts. But actually, before we get into that, let me just start with something a little bit more relatable, I guess, for some people, which is, do you have a favorite movie for wardrobe or anything like that?
Oh gosh. If I had to choose a favorite movie, all my favorite costume moments are small. I get really excited if something is beautifully distressed, or if something, I get excited with TV shows when clothing is repeated, because a lot of TV shows, it's just fashion, 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 instead of like, this person has a closet. And so if you see the same hoodie show up 3 times in a season, I think that's really cool. And that's something, like, really exciting. So, I don't know that I have an exciting answer for that.
I love that. Actually, that example, even though it wasn't a specific show, but that kind of thing is, like, that's not what I think most people would immediately think about. Some people, oh, well, Star Wars has this or that or whatever, but that extra underlayer of storytelling and just thinking about the character, like you said before, how, like, the character has a closet, especially for a show. That's really cool. Do you keep talking about that. What are some shows you like that do that kind of thing?
The first time I noticed it, this was years and years ago, the first time I noticed it was Degrassi, The Next Generation. I loved the costume design on that show. I loved watching the kids. Every year they would kind of get a new wardrobe, but then they would repeat the same outfits throughout that season. And I thought that was really indicative of how it is to grow up, and every year you get some new things, but you still have your old stuff. One of the characters wore the same hoodie for like 3 seasons in a row, which I thought was really great and really fun. And that's kind of one of the first times I noticed. The other big costume moment in my life, I guess, when I really started to realized that I was really into costumes, was The Village. I remember watching it in the theater and being so confused the whole time because the costumes didn't match what they were saying. The costumes didn't, the way they dressed and the way that their costumes looked and the silhouettes didn't make a whole lot of sense with some of the things that they mentioned. And I was just so confused until the very end. There's the twist. And I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. I see. So
wow.
I love when design tricks me into thinking it's not great design, but actually it's phenomenal design.
That's such a great example. And I love how, because we have a spoiler-free show, everybody, and we're keeping it that way. But thank you for... I would not have noticed that. That's such a cool example, and how with that story... that's I'm already learning stuff here. This is great. So, that's now you used a word earlier that a lot of people know, but just for everybody, can you tell us what de-stressed means?
Sure. Distressed clothing is clothing that has been kind of beaten to death. You can take something brand new from the store and make it look like it's 5 years old, 10 years old, 20 years old. I remember when I was working on Outsiders, my favorite thing was going into the Age or Dyer room and watching them work, because they would take these brand new white collared shirts for like the prison guards or whatever, and then they would just dinge them down enough so it just looked like those shirts had been thrown in with the wash and the dry with their black pants for 5 years. So it was just a little dingy. It was just a little, it wasn't stark white. It wasn't beautiful. It was just a little bit, looked like their black pants had been rubbing up against them for 5 years in the wash.
Yeah, there's a lot of films I've seen that could have really benefited from de-stressing or having a designated wardrobe person, particularly smaller productions when it's like the filmmaker is running to Target and buying stuff, and it's like if you look at the characters, if they're wearing slacks, it's like they've got a crease in them in a certain way or whatever, like they've been folded on the shelf for a while, and it's clear like they just got these, and just adding to building the world like that is so vital to films. And I think it's really easy for people to think about wardrobe in like the big sense, or like the fantasy sci-fi where it's like, oh, we can have their clothes mean stuff, as opposed to something that happens in the real world where you think, oh, well, they just wear clothes sometimes, if that's how you think about it. Mm-hmm. But like you still get to make decisions on color and just like making it look lived in and real. When you're on a project, at what point in like they're writing the script, they start hiring, like casting, or at what point do you start to get involved? And maybe the answer is different a lot, and if it's different a lot, then I'm just going to add that ideally. When do you start getting involved? Is it before casting? Is it during? Is it after? Or
ideally, I'm involved before casting. I love being involved with casting, but that's, of course, it doesn't happen very often.
How would that work?
That happens more with theater, usually. I might be there during auditions. I might sit in on, not necessarily auditions, but callbacks, and the director just might have questions about what I think, how people go together and things like that, and I can kind of put my thoughts in. Obviously, I don't have say ultimately, but it is really nice to be a visual person in the room, because directors aren't always visual people. They're big picture people, and I'm looking at a much smaller picture. So it's very nice to be there and to be part of that. Obviously, I know that it's a little bit different with film, but generally I am there. I need at least a few days, sometimes several weeks, to just go through the script and figure out just how many costumes, how many changes, what's going to be needed, what are we going to need to be, where might I be able to source things. So even before I even get to the bodies, it's just figuring out the script and the course of events there.
Do you have a favorite costume that you've made completely, like head to toe from scratch, like, or that you had the most hand in fabricating?
The first thing that comes to mind is recently, last February, I worked on a film. It was a short called 24 Frames Lala, and it was so fun. It was in Philadelphia, and it's about a filmmaker kind of going through the pandemic, but there's also these kind of spiritual overtones. There's a lot of dream sequences, nightmare sequences, so I really got to have fun, just a lot of fun with the costumes, and it was essentially one actor is the whole film. There's a couple extras, but for the most part it's this one actor, and so I got to just toy with how I was going to have them move through the worlds, and because it was such a small operation, it was just me. I was the designer, I was the supervisor, I was the tailor, I was everything. So I got to build some really fun things. I built a coat, a snakeskin coat with actual snakes coming out of the top.
Oh, wow.
It was really
cool.
fun.
That's awesome. So when you're when do you meet the actors typically? Because I'm focusing a lot of this around actors, partially because of your experience with acting, but also, like, ultimately your work is going to be on them, right? So,
Yes.
at what stage are you meeting these people typically?
I typically meet the actors as soon after they are cast as possible. So as soon as all the ink is dry on the contracts, that's when I'm sending emails and asking for sizes and asking to talk to them and have a meeting and discuss their character, discuss if it's a really small film, what do they have in their closet that they could bring. If it's a larger film, we talk, it's more heady, it's more about their character journey and their arcs. And
So it sounds like you often will collaborate with the actor on
it's very
their
collaborative.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can you talk a bit about what that can look like? An example, perhaps?
Sure. A lot of times I will start by asking them their read on the character because I have my read, but I don't want to necessarily tell them about their character until I hear from them what they've come up with.
That's smart.
And then we could we can, sometimes we can meet in the middle. Sometimes a lot of times they're right on board with exactly how I read it. So that's nice. And if I find, or they have a new insight, or they want to bring something to the character that I didn't see because that's not my life or what have you. So they'll kind of tell me a little bit about the character, and it depends on the person too. Some actors just want to be told what to do, and some actors really want to heavily collaborate. So I can get an idea from that as well. And then we also, what's really really important is we have to talk about bodies, and we talk about what they're comfortable with, what they want to do. I always put in my size sheet, I ask if they have religious concerns, if they have moral concerns, like they don't wear fur, things like that, as well.
Interesting.
Yeah, as well as, of course, what are you allergic to and things like that.
Absolutely. That's good that you have a method as well, because, I mean, even just the topic of modesty with some actors, it's like sometimes I imagine that could be an awkward conversation to have. Like, hey, how much are you okay with showing? This character is probably the kind who would be more okay with this, but how do you feel? And but having like literally a form out, like my experience. Tell me if yours has been different, but my experience is when it comes to stuff like that, being just really clear, having a plan and a method that also gives them the opportunity to voice, like here is the place where I'm gonna listen to if you have any concerns with this. Typically just having a structure ready for potentially difficult conversations like that helps a lot. Sometimes it's just like, yeah, I'm fine with whatever. Yeah, let's do it. I'm down. Yeah, she's a total whatever. And all that. Or it's like, yeah, this guy's a absolute horrible person. If you want to put like a really not cool symbol tattoo on my neck, go for it. But that's having that, like, just being sure of it and making sure that part of that is, hey, how do you really feel about this?
Yeah.
Because you want the actor to be comfortable with, or at least add, like, because sometimes costumes can be uncomfortable, like literally, but like at least at ease with how they appear, because that gives actors so much more confidence. Like if they look the part, if they can see it, it can change so much about everything.
It's amazing sometimes in a fitting, seeing actors, sometimes something just clicks into place and they're like, I feel this character now. These shoes make me stand differently. This outfit makes me hold myself in a different way, and now I feel more like this character. And that's something that is such an amazing thing to see, and I love it every time it happens.
That seems like almost the live theater element of film, which is when you're making it, where it's like you get to see that character first, like before anybody. It's like I saw that them be born in a cool way, which is really hard to convey anything like that in film, I think, because it's like the making of it can be so like dramatic in a live way. But yeah, so now is there, tell me a little bit about, I know you've worked on a film that as of this recording has not been released yet, excuse me, called Unsinkable, which is a historical film about the aftermath of the Titanic disaster. It's not specifically a sequel to the James Cameron film, all right, but it's it's based on a true story.
It is.
Following those events.
It is. It's based on the senator, William Alden Smith, who essentially took it upon himself to say, why did this happen? How did this happen? How can it never happen again? And he led kind of the charge, at least in the United States, about getting to the bottom of how this disaster could possibly have happened. And so it's kind of a historical courtroom drama with some, lots of action-packed flashbacks.
Oh, wow. Okay, cool. Well, there's now, real quick, like before we even dive even more into that, getting to the bottom of diving in Titanic. Sorry. Do you have what kind of genres have you worked in before? Like that's historical. Can you just you don't have to list everything, right? But just can you give us an idea? Have you done sci-fi, fantasy before?
I would say sci-fi is probably the one that I've done the least. I've done a lot of historical. I really enjoy historical. I love layering history on top of psychology and just seeing how because people are people throughout time immemorial. But when you have society, when you grow up in a certain society, your brain does work a little bit different. So I think it's really interesting there. Also, the costumes are fun. I've done modern stuff, which is fun. And there is an added layer of difficulty with modern stuff because everybody thinks that they've been to the store and gotten clothes. So it's really it can be really difficult. People have a lot more opinions when it's modern versus if it's historical, or fantasy or something like that. They're a little more likely to be like, you're the expert. But if it's modern, you come across a lot more opinions, which is fine. It's just a very different collaboration.
Right. That I hadn't considered that, but that makes so much sense. Have you done horror before?
A little, not much. I would say the closest I've done with horror outside of theater, I've done a little bit more of that kind of stuff with theater, but it would be the nightmare sequences and things like that I did
cool.
last
with the snakes and all that. Cool.
So
that really sounds like rad. So, all right. So back to Unsinkable then, historical, and you do a lot of historical work. Tell me a bit about the research you do for this kind of thing. Is it mostly in books? Do you find old fashion magazines? Is it Google image? What did people wear in the 1910s? Tell us a bit about what you do for that.
Oh, all of the above. This is why I like to have a lot of time with the script, because then I can read and read and read, right? I can read something my favorite thing to do is actually read novels that are either by people that are associated with what the film is about, or a historical novel, something like that, because there are descriptions of clothes, and that's a really great way to kind of discover things about what these people are wearing. So I read for Unsinkable, I read as many books as I possibly can. I read the entire list of all of the bodies retrieved, because they described every single body that they retrieved. And I got about halfway through the list and I was getting really upset and really sad, but then I felt sad for the people at the end of the list, so I had to finish reading the list.
Yeah.
I read a description of 600 some bodies that they retrieved from
Wow.
off the out of the water, and I learned a lot. All of the sailors had tattoos, all of them.
All of them.
Yeah,
Wow.
they all had tattoos. It was
So
you
it's
know
true,
almost
what they
all of the
said.
workers. It was really really interesting.
What kind of tattoos did they have?
They, a lot of, I think, mostly stick and poke kind of stuff. They were anchors, a lot of anchors, things like that. But yeah, it was really
Mostly
interesting.
arms and like mostly on the arms and legs.
Things that could be, things that could be hidden by clothes. But
Gotcha.
yeah.
Wow. So yeah, a lot of research to do for that. That's cool that you also read novels for, because I feel like I don't know as many people in film who utilize books for a lot of what they do, which on the one hand kind of makes sense because it's a visual medium and there's so many resources that are like behind the scenes documentaries, or it's like, oh, well, the best way to learn is experience and all that. But I have a pretty decent sized library at my home, and a big portion of it is like a few shelves are just my filmmaking books. And then, of course, if I'm doing another project that, like, I'm writing a screenplay right now that's for a historical thing, and so I've been reading like mad for that. But for wardrobe, that's an interesting resource that makes sense when you say it, but didn't immediately occur to me. Like, especially reading novels from people involved in it to get a sense of the wardrobe, because also you're getting a sense of the person, which will guide you a lot. Yeah, you also answered a question that I sometimes will ask, which is like, what's a difficult part of what you do that people might not expect, and reading the descriptions of the bodies is on that. And I've read some descriptions like that as well, with like the cleanup from Remember the Maine disaster as well. But yeah, so do we, let me ask, do you know I'll just quiz you real quick. Do you know who Edith Head was?
Oh, of course,
okay,
absolutely.
cool. I mean, obviously you would. But yeah, I think one of my favorite examples of her work is subtle again, which is in White Christmas. In the first half of the movie, Danny Kaye has a dance number, and he's wearing this gray suit, and his socks and shoes are exactly the same color and shade and everything as the rest of him. So he's just this unbroken, like, cold gray going all the way down. So I just felt like mentioning that to everybody. But there's so all right, great. Now, when you're not making something by hand, all right, because I feel like that kind of makes sense. It's like, oh, well, your actor is a certain size and you have a certain character, and you build something around them and all the research that you've done. When would you, and what's the process for the scrounging about to find stuff that works for other cast members? What can you tell us a bit more about that? Also, I'm using terms like fabrication and scrounging. If I say something that is not technically the right word or something, or if there is a better one, please let me know, because I'd like to learn and not just keep saying things that are incorrect.
Sure.
But yeah, so.
Well, there's a couple different ways to get costumes. You can rent them. You can borrow them, or it's also renting. Really, if you're renting from the actor or renting from a rental house, it's really it's very similar situation. You can build them. You can purchase things at the store, and you can thrift. So thrifting, I love thrifting because you can find really unique things, but that there's also a downside to having something that's very unique, because if it gets destroyed, if you need another one, if you need a progression of distress.
I can't get blood on it.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah. So there is that problem. And again, going back to with theater, it has to survive a 6-week run. So as much as there are really cool things that you can find in thrift and on Etsy, eBay, with Unsinkable, going back to that, I tried to pepper in just enough actual artifacts from the period so that it was really cohesive. Because I was also I borrowed a lot from CMU, Pitt, Point Park. I did a lot of renting from the local universities for a lot of the extras and some of the main characters, a few other rental houses around.
Now, for those universities, were you already connected with them, or did you have yes them?
Yes,
All right,
yeah,
cool.
I had a connection with them.
Fantastic.
So.
Yeah, I'm also just gonna guess here that usually if you're going to make something by hand, that's often going to be for one of the more like main characters or speaking roles.
Yes.
Probably. But you probably, I think you said you will occasionally mix and match as well. Like you might find a vest or waistcoat, that works perfectly for a guy, but you need to do something special for his coat.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the artistry for you probably comes in with giving, like especially if you're mixing and matching, making sure that their look has a lot of unity to it, so that it looks all part of the same person's closet, as you said.
Exactly. And it's something that you also want to keep the historical context in your mind. Something that happens very, very, very commonly in film and theater is historical men will take their coats off, and they really didn't do that in real life. It was just part of their clothes. It would be like taking your bra off like in the middle of a crowded room. It just is kind of weird.
But they do it in movies all the time.
They do it in movies all the time.
I sometimes wonder about that, because even with like the movie Last of the Mohicans, French and Indian War type film, and it's like you've got these British soldiers who are wearing these red wool coats, and it's like sweltering heat in the summer, and I'm like, did they really wear these like all the time? Because like how, like you're made out of the same stuff, right? Like how are you not all passing out? It's like you don't have as much water as I do. Like how are you doing this? And it's like, no, yeah, they just did that, and I think the result was they got sick and died a lot. But
I will say that wool is not the way that we think of wool is not exactly how it worked historically.
Really?
Wool is actually really good at wicking away moisture, so it's not the worst thing to have in the summer. Cotton tends to hold on to sweat, and then you're just wet. But wool can kind of wick it away, so it's a little breezier.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, I'm just learning all kinds of cool stuff today. That's awesome. I'm like, well, thanks. Now that movie, I mean, it was already accurate, but now I'm like, oh, the British Army makes a bit more sense to me now.
Yeah.
Okay.
But also, I remember watching some documentary about furniture, I think, and they were talking about how for this particular period, somebody mentioned how, these couches are really not comfortable. And the curator was saying, comfort wasn't like an idea. It wasn't a thing that people really thought about in this period.
Yeah. That's funny.
So, they sit on a couch. It's not the way that we want to sit on a couch and like watch TV for 9 hours.
It's not like a big foamy marshmallow. Like it's a very stiff kind of, like, it looks great.
Yeah.
That's funny how, like, people weren't as concerned about comfort back then, I guess.
It just wasn't something that they thought about that often.
They're like, life is hard. So is the couch, I guess. That's great. That's wild. So, all right, cool. Well, we've got, now, I've asked a couple people because I know a few people who've worked on Unsinkable, and it was one reason why I'm kind of like asking more about this one. Do you have any idea when this thing might be released? I think I heard that it's finished, like the film is done. But do you have any intel on like how or when it's going to be released or anything?
I know when I hope it's released.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, I should reach out to the creators of that and have
Oh,
them
they'd
on
love to
here.
talk to you, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
just be like, wait, why don't I just ask them?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
yeah, I
they're
should totally.
great humans.
Yeah. Oh, good. I'm glad to hear. Yeah, I've only heard positive things from people who worked with them. I've never met them, but they sound awesome. So, and I'm a big like, I love it when people make historical films and all that. So we've got now. There's a little bit of peril. Then, what's something that can go wrong with wardrobe? Some things are obvious with like, oh, a stunt man, or a stunt woman, they could get injured. You know, an actor who's supposed to sing could get strep throat, you know, or whatever. But for wardrobe, aside from the, you know, a fire, which I'm sure has happened, but like, can you tell us some stuff that can like makes the wardrobe person's heart race? You know, like just goes, oh no, or like what can go wrong? Like where can stress come from in this kind of role?
Oh, all kinds of things can go wrong. Actually, you mentioned stunt people. Clothes are extremely important when it comes to stunt people. You can't just throw something on them. You have to make sure that they are not going to get hurt because of their clothing. And that's something that is really apparent in something like the circus, where people could die if if something happens with their costume. If it comes loose or snags or in some way hinders their ability to do their job, then bad things can happen. Same thing with stunt people. If something isn't fireproofed properly, if something doesn't have the proper kind of grip, if they're not, if a part of their body that they need to not be covered is covered, that can be really dangerous. So there's a true element of danger there when you're coming into the stunt world with costumes. You have to be very, very careful. A lot of questions come up among costume people about fireproofing, and across the board, the answer is have a professional do it. Do not do it yourself, because it's serious. It's really, really important. Other kinds of perils are if an actor accidentally walks off the set with something.
Yeah.
You know, it's very easy.
I've had that happen before.
Yeah,
actually.
it's very
and not
easy.
like intentional.
Of
It's
course,
like
of course not. If
they
you're
just-
used to wearing a wedding band and you have your costume wedding band on, it is so easy to just walk away and not realize that you are not wearing yours or a necklace or something. It's very
bracelets,
absolutely,
especially. Yeah.
jewelry walks so often, and it is almost never on purpose. You know, it's and usually the actor will send a frantic email
Yeah.
almost immediately.
Right. It's not like Ryan Reynolds who just took the Deadpool suit. He was just like, this is mine. Who's going to stop me? And he just took it.
Honestly, the designer let him.
Yeah.
There's
it's
no
like-
way. There's no way the wardrobe people didn't know about it.
Right. Yeah. It's and of course also when someone walks away with something, it's like if they need to shoot another day with that, then often they will forget to bring it.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
and then it's like, oh, well, do they go back to their home and get it? It's like, oh, can we whip up another one? Or is this just something where we have to say, I hope no one notices that their bracelets are gone, you know?
I had to do that somewhat recently. An actor accidentally walked off. It was very cold that day, and we were outside, and they just threw their regular clothes on over their costume and left. And just, you know, it happens. You know, things were frantic. It was crazy.
Yeah.
And then they forgot to bring it the next day when we really needed it. And
Oh, that's horrible.
and we were like an hour and a half away from where they lived.
Oh no.
And
That's not
so
even round trip, right? That's like actually 3 hours of your day gone.
yes, what I ended up doing, and we'll see how it looks in the in the final, but I just desperately ran to Target and took the photos of what I had and tried to replicate it as closely as humanly possible, and I threw them in it. And I was like, this is all we can do is
Yeah.
just try to replicate this one of a kind piece.
Yeah, that's well, I hope it worked. Fortunately, it hasn't happened for a little while for me. It will happen again, many times, but sometimes it was like, look, we can't do anything about it, and hopefully no one notices, and I don't think anybody has, which doesn't mean it wasn't important for it to be there, but it means we got lucky is what happened. And
Yes.
or you try to like not point the camera at the mistake too much. If you do run into an issue like that, sometimes it's like, okay, well, maybe we can switch out like a little bit of our shot list. Maybe we can shoot something that we were going to shoot later with a different person. Like, oh, well, they're here. Let's get that done first. Or depending on how you're planning to shoot the scene, you get the other actor's coverage first as opposed to getting the wide, or the other one. So it's like, it's a lot of problem solving, but every once in a while, yeah, you get that thing where it's like your 3 hour round trip, can't really deal with it that way, can't just not point the camera at this person for a couple of hours, so yeah, you just completely from the ground up, we're like, let's try to get it back, and that's but it sounds like that was a modern day project then, so that's at least that was something to work
Yeah.
with.
Yeah, it was a little bit of a fantasy, but yeah,
Okay.
if this had been, if it had been 1912, I would have
Yeah,
been.
just feel like, well, I don't know what to tell you. One of my goals, I haven't really done a formal stunt on a project yet, where like we would need depending on who you talk to, running as a stunt, right? But like something where we needed to have a stunt coordinator come in, potentially a double, and that's something that I really want to do sooner rather than later. I've been trying to learn about that as much as possible before doing that, reading stunt books, and also, of course, there's the Stunt People React stuff by Corridor Digital, those guys are amazing. And one of the things they talked about with wardrobe is a lot of stunts require people to put extra padding on. But then if the stunt coordinator and the wardrobe person aren't really in sync, then sometimes the wardrobe is made, or like there'll be wardrobe made and there's not really a way for padding to be in there, especially if it's like, well, there's a sequel, we already know what this character is supposed to look like, we can't really do anything about it now. Or the other thing is that stunt women in particular have a much more difficult time, because a lot of women who are in roles that have stunts, a lot of their clothing is very form-fitting, and you can't like hide pads under most of it, or they have a lot of exposed skin. And it's like, they're supposed to get pushed out of a car onto the pavement. How do you do that? And it's one of those things that, is just one of those things that people need to consider with, like, even though we have our individual departments, it's such a great example of how everything is connected. And like the acting department, of course, is connected with wardrobe because that's what they're wearing, but also with stunts and also with visual effects if they need to like do some kind of de-aging or anything else, or special effects. It's like, oh, my fingers are going to get sliced off in this scene. Well, it needs to look like their hand, right? So I think that's another cool example that you brought up with safety being around, because I feel like a lot of people like to say like, hey, safety first, but there's some areas where it doesn't always immediately occur to people like, oh, this actually could be dangerous. And of course stunts is pretty obvious, but realizing how everything can has the ability to be integrated with stunts, including visual effects, is kind of a wild thing, you know, and why it's better to, you know, just do it the careful way, you know. So
Yeah, I always try to talk to the stunt coordinator as early as I can, because I do know that stunts people do get forgotten about when it comes to clothes, and a lot of times it'll be, and it depends on the budget and the time and all of that, but it can be something where they're just getting thrown in on, you know, just an extra outfit that you bought for the actor. But the thing, and you mentioned women, especially with women, you know, they could both wear a size 8 blouse, but maybe one has a size 7 shoe, one has a size 9, and one is, you know, considerably more muscular than the other. So you are dealing with just different bodies, and it's really, and for them, you want them to be able to do the stunt safely. And to bring it back to Unsinkable again, there's one character who is kind of an intrepid go-getter gal, and I designed some of her costumes after the suffragettes, who were, you know, they're going into basically battle in hobble skirts, and there's, you know, they're getting beat up, they're having fire hoses trained on them, and they have these tight skirts on. And so that was something that I wanted to talk. I talked to the director about it. I was like, this is something that I just think is really cool, and I think that it would be really good, but I want to make sure that we're all on board and it's cool. So we have this one character in a hobble skirt when she's getting beat up. And so that was something that I had to talk to the stunt person about as well. I was like, this is going to severely restrict your movements. You know, how can we make this work? And it was really cool. You know, she was totally on board, and it was great, and the scene looked really good. But it was something that, you know, I was like, here I am adding something difficult for you, but it ended up looking really good. And so that was really kind of an interesting thing to do with her.
I think that's a really cool angle, because I think the suffragette movement had there's so many things that were going on at that time, like you said, with like getting beat up, dragged around, fire hoses, and all that. And even in Mary Poppins, there's the song at the beginning about it, and there's a brief moment in it where she talks about suffragettes who have been clapped in irons again, and she's like, yeah, we're, you know, fighting the fight and all that. And I remember my dad telling me about what she's referencing, and he's like, yeah, like it's a Disney movie and they're being like very upbeat and about it. He said, but what was happening to those particular people she's talking about is like they would go on hunger strikes when they were arrested. And so they'd have to have like several people hold them down and force feed them. And he's like, it was a, like, you know, the movie's being very hurrah about it, and that's not incorrect. He's like, but don't get it, you know, misunderstood. This was a really rough, you know, situation to be in, and which I was like, oh dang, I'm 7. I didn't know that, you know, or whatever. But I was probably older than that. Like, but still, it's. But I think that's really cool to show how the wardrobe for the stunt you're talking about. On the one hand, it helps the film be more interesting to watch, but it also pays a nod to the history of, here's part of what was really kind of I don't know if absurd is the right word, but like absurd about, you know, this particular situation. It's like lots of people have protested and gotten beat up and all that, and it's like sometimes like, but just that detail, you know, of like, yeah, well, these are things you wouldn't want to run in one of these things.
And you can't. You
yeah,
can't
you
run in
can't.
them.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to do any of that, let alone get beat up. And just showing that, and the amount of thought and coordination that went between you and the stunt person, the actor, and all that, and the director. Just like, here's the order that you go in with everything. For a moment that is oh so brief, perhaps. I haven't seen the film, right? But is that's film. It's like all this work for a few seconds, but it's there forever. And it's when you watch something that you've made, that you've done wardrobe for. Are your is it the first or second or every time like you're like really focused on your work, like, oh, here's what they're wearing and all that, or do you also find you can enjoy the story and the characters? Is it one and the same? How do you feel about that?
It changes, but if a film is really good, I'll get into it. I feel like that's a great marker of a great film, is that I forgot to look at the costumes, and I am kind of always looking at the costumes, especially if it's something that I had to do with, because I'm worrying about it. But if I go through a whole scene or a whole sequence and I forgot to look at the costumes, I'm like, oh, this is good.
That's great. Well, fantastic. Well, is there anything, I think we can start to wrap it up a bit here. Is there anything that you're working on at the moment, or anything that people can, I mean, obviously we're all looking forward to Unsinkable, right? But is there anything else that you would just like people to know about at the moment?
Oh gosh, I feel like everything that I've worked on recently is in post-production, so hopefully it'll be like bang, 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 Brittany Graham Designs fairly soon. Not working on a lot, thanks to, the world and things that are strikes and such, but yeah, I'm here for the foreseeable future, so.
Excellent. And is there anywhere that people can follow you, like whether it's online or follow your work or anything? Like if people are more interested in what you're doing, what can they do?
Sure. I am on Instagram as Brittany Graham Designs, and I have a website, brittanygrahamdesigns.com. That's where I am most frequently found.
Awesome. And we will have those also as links in the description below. So this has been a wonderful conversation. I've learned a lot. I think it's a topic I've always been really interested in, but I feel like could get a little bit more attention as well. And
That's very appreciated.
Absolutely. It's really been it's been a cool conversation. I've learned a lot of cool stuff. It's opened my mind a bit more for things to like look at and think about, and of course we'll have all your stuff in the description below. So I'm really looking forward to the stuff that you've worked on that's in post right now or yet to be released. And thank you very much for being my guest today.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Absolutely. All right. Well, everybody, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the StudioMEcast. And don't forget, we give free tours. So if you're watching this, congrats, you just won a free tour. Stop on down to StudioME. Thanks a lot, everybody. Bye-bye. Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you want to start your own podcast, why wait? Reach out to us at StudioME.me, and I hope you hear me again soon.